Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the third of our From Around the World speaker series, summer speaker series. And I'm Jim McFarland, president of your World Affairs Council. Your program today comes to you from Guatemala City, Park City, Utah, and right here in Rancho Mirage. So it's great to have you all with us. Many of us have questions about what's happening with the migration surge across our southern border. Is it our communications policies? Is it the way we enforce our border laws? Or is it something else altogether? So today, we're going to find out. We're going to get some answers from the man who knows. And I'm going to turn the program over to introduce our speaker, to Ken Bolden, your program's chair. And Ken, take it from here.
Thanks for the introduction, Jim. As Jim mentioned, I'm coming to you from Park City, Utah. And of course, our program will be the third in our series From Around the World. And our presenter will be located in Guatemala City. A little administrative announcement, and that is, make sure that if you have a question, please scroll down to the bottom of the screen where you will find a Q&A tab. And I encourage you to present your questions at any time. In other words, during the presentation or once we start the discussion, you're welcome to submit questions. As I mentioned, I'll serve as the moderator, and I will try to consolidate any duplications and clarify any questions that any of you have. Just so you'll know in advance, our speaker has agreed that if all the questions are not answered by the time we get to the top of the hour, then we will be, or he will be happy to remain with us for a few more minutes in order to allow us to have all of your questions addressed before we adjourn. As Jim mentioned, today is the third From Around the World program that we presented. Of course, many of you had the opportunity to hear the ambassador from the Netherlands talk about war crimes in Syria, and also a chance to hear Alex Chow tell you what the situation is like in terms of the protests and the pro-democracy movements in Hong Kong. Today, as Jim also mentioned, and I reiterated, our speaker is located in Guatemala City. His name is Steve Hecht. He is a businessman. He is a frequent guest on many TV shows, a writer, and a film producer. Born in New York and educated in New York, he moved to Guatemala almost 50 years ago. So he is certainly an expert, and he has firsthand knowledge of exactly what the root causes of the big migration from Central America to the United States are. So at this time, Steve, I'd like for you to meet the most interesting audience in the desert.
Thank you very much, Ken. I want to thank the World Affairs Council of the Desert for inviting me to make this presentation. And as a nonpartisan organization, I will try to stick to the facts. And unfortunately, in today's environment, sometimes saying undisputed facts is considered partisan, but I can't help that. The scene you see behind me is a virtual background, and it's a panoramic view of Guatemala City looking from the East Mountains to the West Mountains. Guatemala City is located in the valley. The forces driving Central American migration are economic. The United States is a magnet. It has better paying work and much more of it. GDP per capita in the United States is about 14 times larger than Guatemala's. Gap for specific migrant areas like farm workers is lower than 14, but it's certainly more than enough to incentivize the migration. And Guatemala is the richest country in Central America. As a historic background, Latin America is characterized by centralization and abuse of power, as opposed to the United States, where we have traditionally been decentralized with rule of law. Decentralization and rule of law would reduce migration from Central America, but that, of course, is a long-term project. In the intermediate term, people will continue to come. The numbers of people coming depends on the difficulty of entry. Vast majority of migrants from Central America are very good people, very responsible. They're supporting their families at home with billions of dollars yearly in remittances. It would be nice to be able to accommodate all of them, but if we grant unlimited access, it would overwhelm us and it would change the United States system. We need immigrants, but we have to have a system that controls immigration. We can't just let it be wide open. That's the only way we can keep our democratic system working. We can have compassion for these people, and we should, but we don't have to destroy our country to prove that we have compassion. Two factors are very important in to understand immigration: pull and push. The pull is how we deal with immigrants in the United States. And the push is what happens in the countries of their origin. Turning first to the pull factors. The key distinction that people need to understand is between asylum and economic migration. They're very different things. Asylum is what's generally referred to as refugees. These are not refugees, these are migrants. To qualify for asylum, applicants must prove they would be persecuted on at least one of 5 grounds: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or particular social group. Most migrants in recent years, immigrants into the United States, are from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. In those countries, there are no persecution that meet the 5 categories that I just mentioned for legal refugee status. That means they're all economic migrants. Asylum abuse, that is abuse of the asylum system, claiming it when you're not really qualified for it, is the key pull factor affecting immigration into the United States from Central America. We have to look at the Flores Settlement Agreement as a key landmark. It was litigation began in 1985 that was settled between the Clinton administration and the plaintiffs in 1997. And the agreement was that the government would release unaccompanied alien children without unnecessary delay. In 2014, I and a reporter from the Washington Examiner and Pacifica Radio in California had an interview with a coyote, a human smuggler in the Western Highlands of Guatemala. Very interesting interview. We learned all about how their system works. It's quite a business. And the interesting part was when we asked, what do you charge to take somebody to the United States? And the coyote, whose name we only knew as Juan, said, for an adult, we charge $6,000. Okay, what about a minor? Less than $3,000. I immediately looked at him and I said, what difference? Much more for an adult than you do for a minor. And Juan's answer was, with the adults, we have to walk for 2 days once we cross into the United States. And then it's dangerous to vehicles in that space that it takes us the 2 days to walk. So he said that then they have to take the client to whatever city they want to go. And what about the children? He said, once we cross into the United States, we take all the children, we put them together, and we say, children, go over there, and we point to a place, and we watch as they go, and we tell them to make noise, and they get there, they make noise, we wait until the authorities pick them up, and once the authorities pick them up, we call their contacts in the United States, our job is done, and we go home. That's pretty astounding. And so they're not really unaccompanied. They're unaccompanied when they're picked up, but they're accompanied almost all the time before they're picked up. In 2015, a year later, federal judge Dolly G made entry for migrants even easier. She interpreted unnecessary delay as being no more than 20 days, and that it applied to accompanied as well as unaccompanied alien children. So children and the adults accompanying them would be released into the country pending hearings. A year later, 2016, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals reaffirmed Judge G's decision in that it applied to all children, accompanied or unaccompanied, but the court said that the adults were not covered and that they could be detained, they could be processed under existing asylum procedures. Well, that meant separation. Separation, as we all know who've paid attention, separation of minors and the adults that they're with, supposedly parents, but not really, is not acceptable to the American public in general. Now, these migrants are coached to claim credible fear because that gets them an asylum hearing. The system is absolutely inadequate to give hearings to all those people, especially in 20 days. There's just no way. You don't have enough judges. There's not enough infrastructure. You can't do it. So you release them. You release them pending hearings, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. Hardly any of those people show up for the hearing. So asylum abuse is the way economic migrants get into the United States. Fleeing violence, which you often hear, fleeing violence is not grounds for asylum. If it were, people from inner cities like Baltimore and other places could claim asylum in Canada because there's more violence there than there is in a place like Guatemala. The only way to change these asylum procedures, this is law. A court decision has the force of law, and the only way to change that is through congressional legislation. In the previous administration, congressional Republicans tried that. Democrats refused to bring it up. So never happened. The previous administration circumvented this issue by entering into agreements with Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. People could still request asylum, but not from within the United States. This dramatically lowered illegal immigration because the overwhelming majority of asylum seekers are people who know perfectly well that they don't qualify for asylum under current law. The first person returned to Guatemala under the U.S.-Guatemala asylum agreement was a Honduran. And they said, well, you want to apply for asylum in Guatemala? He said, no, I'm going to go back to my village in Honduras. Well, of course, because there's no oppression, there's no persecution. And so he went back home and probably waited for another opportunity to get into the United States. The current administration changed the processing asylum claims from outside the United States to inside the United States. But the government is absolutely incapable of processing this. So the obvious result happened, which is an uninterrupted flow because the demand to get to the United States is so great. It's important to understand that this trip is perilous, extremely harsh conditions. Women take birth control measures before they leave because they know they'll be raped. That's how desperate they are to get to the United States. Some people die in the journey. Families are extorted. The cartels charge money to pass through their territories. Coyotes charge as much as $12,000. And they have networks throughout the United States and the countries of origin to assure collection. Some of it's legitimate because, you know, the people from communities don't want to close off the ability to get to the United States from other people at home. And so there's pressure to pay. And there's also, of course, the illegitimate pressure, which are threats against the people. And the coyotes and the cartels are obviously capable of both of those. So the immigrants go into debt for years, and they sometimes have to perform criminal activity as payment. Now, current administration makes pleas to people not to come, issues warnings, now is not the time to come. But in a place like Guatemala, there are more cell phones than there are people. So the migrants know in real time what's happening at the border. So they pay absolutely no attention to the words, even if they hear them. And they're going to come in increasingly large numbers unless we eliminate asylum abuse. Now, the current administration claims this is a humane policy, but I say it would be a lot better to just give them visas. Just say, come by the consulate, pick up your visa, and fly to the United States. It's going to be a lot cheaper, and they would avoid mistreatment at the hands of the cartels. And of course, the cartels wouldn't be able to make so much money if they did this. But obviously, such a policy would be quite blatantly flooding the country with illegal immigrants, because a visa doesn't give you the right, unless, of course, well, that's a procedure that you'd have to go through, but a tourist visa doesn't give you the right to stay in the country. But it would still be more humane to do that than to do what we're doing at the moment. Now, the push factors. There's a lot of poverty and human suffering in Central America. I've seen it. There's no question about it. It's due to poor management, poor organization, centralization, and abuse of power. Prevents opportunity and creates an unacceptable situation. Now, the current administration of the United States says that corruption is the problem. Well, Mexico might be the most corrupt country in the Western Hemisphere. It's certainly very corrupt. And it's a net immigration country. More people are moving into Mexico than are moving out of Mexico. Well, it has a GDP per capita double that of Guatemala, and there's part of the explanation for why it's a net immigration country. So yeah, increasing the economies is a very good thing to do. But the real problem to be able to help the economy grow is lack of rule of law. Guatemala is a very rich country, and it's got good people, and several million of them are in the United States. They send back about $11 billion a year in remittances, so they're taking care of their families. The reason that there's not opportunity in Guatemala is the gross mismanagement. With proper management, Guatemala could be a model for other countries. It's also the key to immigration, because its 595-mile border with Mexico is the only land route from South and Central America to the United States. Guatemala has no state authority on its borders, and this is due to problems with the judiciary and criminal prosecution. The Prosecutor General's office doesn't prosecute armed groups that force people to invade property, destroy factories, and obstruct authorities' access to their areas. The judiciary protects corrupt prosecutors. It also closes hydroelectric plants, mines, and other large agro-businesses through illegal rulings, which they claim are protecting indigenous people and the environment. Now, that sounds like a worthy cause, but it's a distraction. It really doesn't matter how good your cause is if your way to get there is illegal, because you can't possibly develop the country on that basis. The U.S. Embassy began pressuring Guatemala authorities back in 2010 to put prosecutors and judges of their liking into office who engage in these activities that I just mentioned. This is not my opinion. We're talking public record here, as is the U.S. Embassy support for many officials with public records of criminal actions. So they like their policies and they don't mind their crimes. You can't develop a country that way. This began with Obama. It continued under Trump and now continues under Biden. Hardly anyone is looking at the public record. Now, Guatemala adds about 200,000 new people to the workforce every year. And you need about $10,000 of investment to create a job, more or less. That means that Guatemala needs about $2 billion a year in investment just to absorb the new entrants to the workforce every year. They're not even close to having that quantity. There are no good statistics, so I can't tell you how much investment there is. I've looked lots of times and talked to people. You can't find it. Now, investment requires legal certainty, and that is completely lacking in Guatemala. And of course, the other countries, it works the same way. Kamala Harris is in charge of mitigating the circumstances that cause migration from Central America, especially Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. She continues the same policies that have already failed and produced the current situation. There's no change. For instance, Harris met with 3 Guatemalans in the White House recently. One was a former strongwoman of the Court of Last Resort, Guatemala's constitutional court, and 2 former prosecutors general. All 3 have long public records of criminal behavior. Again, this is not opinion, it's public record. The judge, Gloria Porras, ruled twice in the defendant's favor in 2 cases when she was the defendant. That is, a judge ruled in a case to which she was a party. That's illegal any place in the world, even in tyrannies, it's illegal. Prosecutor General Claudia Paz issued written orders to prosecutors under her signature, and they blatantly, obviously violated laws in Guatemala. Her successor, Tel Maldana, continued the same illegal orders. In addition, she's accused of embezzlement. A finance ministry audit after she left Guatemala found and evaluated a building that she had purchased as being worth half of what she paid for it. Plus, it didn't meet government regulations for a government purchase. These 3 people met with Kamala Harris in the White House and received praise. All public record, as I've said. The message to Guatemalans by promoting these officials is devastating. State Department supported a prosecutor named Juan Francisco Sandoval. This year, they even created an anti-corruption champion award for Sandoval. Sandoval granted the infamous Odebrecht a release for $384 million claim. Guatemala didn't get anything. Odebrecht pled guilty in U.S. federal court to somewhere between $700 and $800 million in bribes, and agreed to a fine of $2.6 billion. And Sandoval let them off the hook. And the Solicitor General of Guatemala filed a criminal complaint with the Prosecutor General for usurpation against Sandoval because he had no authority to issue a release. That's a civil thing. It wasn't a criminal thing, and he was a criminal prosecutor. Sandoval was also the prosecutor in a highly publicized case in which the judge certified criminal prosecutorial activities because 2 witnesses testified they had been coerced to give false testimony. This is the people that the United States Embassy and State Department are openly supporting in Guatemala. How do they expect that they're going to increase economic activity and mitigate the circumstances that create migration? Not possible. The current prosecutor general fired Sandoval for those acts that I just mentioned and others. Many State Department officials attacked her for this and demanded Sandoval be reinstated. The embassy is pressuring private sector groups to support Sandoval despite his public record of criminal behavior. Now, this sounds unreal. Sounds like a fantasy world. I wouldn't believe it either, but I've seen it. I'm living in it. And as I say repeatedly, and I have to say it, it's all in the public domain. There's no way that Guatemala can reach its potential under these circumstances. And the same applies to other countries in the region. It is possible to fix this, even in the short term. Just properly apply the law. That's all. Guatemala's masses yearn for opportunity and security. They're tired of poverty and violence and lack of opportunity. Some of Guatemala's elites, who have been shaken by the criminal onslaught against them in the last 10 years, now understand that their only real security is economic development across the board that brings in everybody. In other words, competition based on the price and quality of goods and services as opposed to government power. That's what has to change. And that's very typical in the third world. And there's demand to change it. But that means creating the rule of law. There is widespread demand for this across the spectrum in Guatemala. This is the moment to do it. The United States could help with training security forces and giving political support to institutions to properly apply the law, especially in the border areas. With proper application of law, businesses would start again. All those businesses that I mentioned that the court illegally closed, they would start up. That would create more opportunity. With proper application of law, you'd have more security. That would create an upward spiral of economic activity. It would also create good relations between residents and security forces. And that is the key to reducing the transit by smugglers of people and materials through Guatemala's border. So if you reduce that, then even the other countries, they can't send those people through Guatemala, and it's the only land route. And this would be a tremendous boon for the United States and for Guatemala and the rest of the region. Unfortunately, current policy both pulls and pushes, that's US policy, pulls and pushes migrants to take this perilous journey. Ending asylum abuse and creating development would be a win for the Central American countries and for the United States. Thank you.
Well, Steve, that was an excellent presentation and certainly gives us a better perspective on the push and the pull, which are, as you characterized, the real factors that affect this migration issue. The first question is from Mark, and is one in which I was contemplating the same, had the same concern. And that would be, you have this common 500 plus mile border between Guatemala and Mexico, as you talked about. So what is Mexico doing about trying to detain the migrants at their southern border?
Mexico does just about nothing to do that. They did for Trump. Trump, and it's very unusual, Trump and the Mexican president, Manuel López Obrador, got along very well. López Obrador is a hardcore leftist, but he did everything Trump wanted because Trump had the hammer on him. If he closed down the Mexican border, that would be a huge problem for Mexican president. So he put soldiers on the southern border and on the northern border. And that helped to some extent, of course. And then Trump's remain in Mexico policy, that helped discourage people from coming, because if you can't get into the United States while your asylum claim is being processed, then you haven't really done anything. And why take that journey and why spend that money? So the Mexico really doesn't care that much, and they'll do it if they get pressured to do it. Right now, they have no pressure to do that.
The next question is from Tom Riley, who's had a lot of experience in the diplomatic corps. And he said he's been looking for the stats, so that he was interested in 3 categories. And this may be something that we'll just have to research in a different way, but in the event you're familiar with these, in other words, he said there's 3 categories. In other words, how many of these migrants are caught and then refused entry? How many are caught and then allowed to stay? And then how many go undetected? And so they're never counted in the numbers. So do you have any insight into that?
Not really, because, how do we know how many slip through? It's obvious that there are a number of them who slip through. I mean, look, this coyote that we interviewed, he was in the United States 72 times, he told us. And he never had any problem getting in. And they walk for 2 days. Those people are not part of the statistics. So how could you possibly know? So there's just no way. Only whoever comes in contact with the government can we have statistics about.
Well, I might be able to offer Tom a little bit of guidance, because before we started this presentation, I went on the Homeland Security website, and Tom, if you'll take a look at that, it does give some facts and figures of how many people have crossed the border and been detained, but immediately sent back to the country of origin, primarily under what's called Title 42. which is actually a law that's enforced by CDC, that these folks are assumed to have been in a country where there's a high degree of a contagious disease such as COVID-19. So in essence, they've been deported immediately. And it does give you some facts and figures on how many unaccompanied children have been detained, because they've been allowing those in. Steve, you addressed this, but I want to ask you to dig a little deeper on it. But the next question was, if Guatemala is so corrupt and doesn't enforce the rule of law, why is the United States offering any type of financial aid or support?
It shouldn't, and that would involve opinion and speculation. But let's put it this way: there is no point in providing aid that is not going to promote what the United States would like to promote. Now, is what the money is supposed to be promoting? Is that what the people in charge of giving it actually really want to promote? Well, you can look up a Judicial Watch report from 2018, and Judicial Watch identified more than a dozen organizations that received money from both USAID and George Soros's foundations. Soros, we all know, is one of the leading destabilizers of governments throughout the world.
You know, one of the things that you commented on earlier on, which to me personally was a little bit of a surprise, you talked about, you know, the real motivation is either economic, or those who are seeking asylum, it's got to be because of danger or violence if they were to return. But you seem to focus that it's almost entirely economic, and that the number of asylum claims are mostly false. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And look, I mean, fleeing violence is totally understandable. I mean, anybody would want to flee the violence, and there's certainly violence here. And I have to say that these policies that I identified, supporting criminals, the United States government supporting criminals in Guatemala's government, I mean, they make it worse, not better. They didn't create this situation, but they do make it worse. And it's astounding that they would do that. And it's almost impossible to imagine what the reasons could possibly be, but it's here, and it's happening. And so what can we do about that, other than just bringing it to the public attention? And you know, Guatemalans don't want this violence. They would like to be done with it. Even the wealthy elites would like to end it. Everybody would like to end it. And they have a new court in Guatemala. And the State Department and the Biden administration were very upset with this new court. And they're doing everything they can to hobble it. And the court has started to make some decisions according to law. And they got rid of that prosecutor, as I mentioned. And that's a good step. But they have opposition from the United States. So Guatemalans want to create a better society. Now there's demand for rule of law. Now there's demand for security and opportunity. And now is the time to promote it. And the United States government should change their policy 180 degrees and work with the Guatemalans who want rule of law and less violence. And that will be to the United States' benefit.
Let's talk a little bit about Title 42. For those who are not familiar with it, and quite frankly, until I did a little bit of internet research, it's not something I was fully aware of. But of course, it allows the Public Health Authority, which is our CDC, to, in essence, and it was implemented really in March of 2020 because of COVID, to turn away any immigrant simply based on the fact that they were coming from a country of origin that had a high COVID-19 rate. And the Trump administration apparently effectively used that as a way to, once they detained someone or apprehended an immigrant, illegal immigrant, that they could deport them immediately. And they had good success with it. It's my understanding that the Biden administration was planning not to follow through with that. However, the latest information that I've been able to find is that they are continuing that policy of immediate deportation under Title 42. They are facing current opposition and a court challenge, it looks like, from the ACLU and other pro-immigration groups. So give us a little insight from your view down there in Guatemala City.
Well, nobody here is paying much attention to that, but my personal view is that applying Title 42 is fairly recent, that they weren't doing it. You know, I watch U.S. news. I don't watch too much Guatemalan local news on occasion, but I mostly watch U.S. news. And I've noticed that there are a lot of complaints. I mean, it makes no sense. All these COVID restrictions and mandates to vaccines and masks. How do you square that with letting in these migrants? And it's on TV all the time if you want to find it. Some TV, of course, isn't going to cover it, but others do. That you got people coming in without COVID testing, and you can see they're spreading COVID. Now, there's a public pushback, and the government, you know, the Biden administration is certainly aware of public sentiment, and you know they do the best that they can for themselves. So my guess is that they started applying this Title 42 because of public pressure, not because they really care.
You pointed out, using as an example, the violence or the crime rate in Baltimore. But one of our members is under the impression that the homicide rate in Guatemala is very, very high. And the question is, are you concerned for your own safety?
Not particularly. I mean, look, I lived in New York City before I moved to Guatemala, and I can tell you there are some real dangerous places in New York City, and we're talking about the late 60s and the early 70s. And I'm sure that that's still the case, probably more so today. And yeah, so there's violence, but I don't see that where I am. I mean, yeah, it could happen. And unfortunately, although fortunately for me, you know, is being an American means that I'm less likely to be a victim of it. But, you know, that's part of life. And if you really want complete total security, the most secure place I've ever been is Saudi Arabia. Nobody's ever going to attack you in Saudi Arabia, but, you know, you give up a lot of rights if you want to be there. So my preference would be to help Guatemala establish rule of law. And that's why I said what I did, that I know that this is exactly the time to promote it. You can find it from people who before didn't care about it and before were on top of the system, but now they realize that that lack of rule of law created a big problem for them. And it's a big problem for everybody else too. So for me, I'm not particularly concerned, but I would like to help Guatemala improve for the benefit of Guatemala and also for the benefit of the United States.
Let me take this opportunity to tell our participants that the Q&A tab is wide open. So if you've got a question, now's a good time to type it in, and so you can participate in the discussion. Steve, let me deviate just a little bit. There's a lot of folks that are probably on this Zoom call. They're saying, here's a pretty smart guy from New York who's been in Guatemala for 50 years, almost 50 years. And the question is, how about just personalizing and tell us your story and why are you where you are?
Okay, that's a complicated question, and I get it often. And sometimes I give the flip answer: before you can be old and wise, you got to be young and stupid. I thought there was more opportunity in Guatemala than in the United States. And to show that that's absolutely false, when I left New York in 1972, my net worth was probably higher than Bill Gates's. So where is there more opportunity? It's obviously in the United States. But I really enjoyed Guatemala. I liked it. And I didn't want to work in corporations. I have an MBA with a double major, finance and banking. And I worked summers in Wall Street brokerage houses. And I saw the corporate politics. I didn't like corporate politics very much. And I decided that I would try to promote some business for myself. I had contacts in Guatemala, tried all kinds of businesses. We don't have enough time for me to list all the businesses that I attempted. And some of those contacts, one of them was very important for me to learn about Guatemala and why it's underdeveloped. And he had a project that really helped it develop. And I got involved in that and really enjoyed it. And I've learned a lot about Guatemala, and I like it. It's a beautiful country, and it's got great people. And I'm happy here.
The next question would be a little bit more color, so to speak, maybe talking about meeting with the coyotes. Is any estimate on how many are involved in this particular business? You know, how do they do their marketing? That may be a silly question, but and a little bit more detail about the families that are in the U.S. and how they are in essence willing, you know, to remit funds back so that these families can finance these immigration attempts.
Well, that's part of it. A lot of that money goes into construction. You know, these people would prefer to be at home in Guatemala if they could be, but the United States provides the opportunity for them. And so they're investing in their properties. And so they're keeping the economy of Guatemala alive. So it's a really important thing. They're very responsible people. You come right down to it. Now, when the entire family is in the United States, and if they decide to make the United States their permanent home, that's going to be a problem for Guatemala, because then money doesn't continue to flow. But as far as the coyote question goes, that meeting was arranged by a friend of mine who was a public defender, who later became a prosecutor, and through a social worker that knew the coyote. And so we went up to, Nango. It's in the Western Highlands of Guatemala. And we met with this guy, and we were with him for about 2.5 hours. It was fascinating. It's pure capitalism. Now, there's no way to know how many there are, but there are lots of them. And he explained how the business works. And he said that he could be a facilitator, or he could be the coyote. It's completely flexible. It's not an organized structure in the sense of a corporation. They just all have mutual interest. And the reason that he was willing to do the interview is a child had been murdered with a coyote. And this guy said that is not the business. He said he'd give his life for his customers, and that if he could find that coyote, he'd kill him himself. And so he said that it's a perfectly legitimate business, that people want to go, and he facilitates them going. And the United States makes it easy for him to do what he does. And then he also said, which was a little chilling, at the end of the meeting, he told the reporter from the Washington Examiner, who lived in Washington, D.C., he said, hey, by the way, we can reach right up into Washington, D.C., so you make sure that you abide by the rules of this interview.
What is the COVID-19 situation in Guatemala? In other words, not only in terms of cases, variants, but also the vaccination program.
You know, Guatemala can't produce a vaccination, so they have some. They've got some from Russia, and now the United States has donated some, and there are people getting vaccinated, and the percentage of people vaccinated so far is not particularly high, and they need it to get higher. And Guatemalans are basically very stoic people, and just like any place else, there are a lot of people that had COVID that never got registered as having had COVID. Maybe some of them don't even know it. You know, they think, well, I got the flu or something like that. And so, yeah, COVID's a problem. And naturally, there are increasing cases now, just like every place else with this new variant. And, you know, they're handling it. There's a lot of criticism of the government, how the government handles it. I would say that that's probably true with every government on the face of the planet.
I was curious how large, maybe you don't know, but how large do you estimate the expat community to be there of Americans living in Guatemala?
I don't know. I've never seen any statistics on it. I know that, when I came here, they had just ended curfews and things like that, that they had pretty much tamed the guerrilla assault on Guatemala. And they even floated eventually 10 years later, they floated the currency, the quetzal. And I would say that it's basically it's pretty stable that way. And say the question again, Ken. I got a little distracted.
I was just curious I'm not doing a very good job clicking on my video button, but I simply was wondering, how large is that expat community in Guatemala?
Yeah.
And I assume is it the majority of your circle of contacts and friends?
Well, not really. I know a few Americans, not many. The people I associate with are Guatemalans, basically. And in 1979, when the Sandinistas took over Nicaragua, that began that fueled the communist attack on Guatemala, and it reignited the guerrilla insurgency. And a lot of Americans left. It probably reached its peak somewhere around 1982 or so, 83. And a lot of Americans left at that time. Now, probably some have come back, or maybe none of those who left came back, but more have come. I think it's a fairly small community. I don't know the numbers of it, and I see a few Americans from time to time, but not many.
Let's go back to the original points that you were making about the motivation for leaving Guatemala, both economic and those who were seeking asylum. You indicated that you think such a small percentage would be qualified for asylum because of danger or violence in the country. But what do you think the administration could do policy-wise that, in essence, would allow them to make sure that even though it's a small percentage, that those who truly are qualified for asylum, that those are properly handled and that they get due process?
I'm not sure what they could do. I don't think that it wouldn't surprise me that there's nobody in Guatemala who would qualify under current asylum law. Now, if you made asylum law fleeing violence, then most of the population would qualify. But that's if in that case, the United States would have to absorb hundreds of millions of people, which it obviously couldn't do. So I think that the best thing that Guatemala can do, and the best thing that the United States can do, is to recognize why it's underdeveloped and take measures to develop it, which are really simple: decentralization and rule of law. I mean, it's easy to say and it's hard to do. But like I said, the demand is definitely here now for that to happen.
I got a question from a participant who wants to know, is it safe for an American to, in essence, be a tourist or visit Guatemala?
Sure. No problem. You can go just about any. I mean, there are places in Guatemala City you wouldn't want to go. Like I said, there are places in New York City you wouldn't want to go either. And I'm sure that applies to a lot of cities in the United States. So, you should certainly have situational awareness, and you should know where you're going. But if you go to the tourist places like the Rio Dulce, the Lake Atitlan, the Petén, Tikal, they're safe enough. I haven't heard any reports of tourists having problems. There are no travel advisories by the United States Embassy in Guatemala. I mean, they occasionally issue warnings to U.S. residents about road blockages and demonstrations. The part they don't tell you is that they are the ones mostly responsible for that happening. course, they wouldn't be real happy with me for saying that, but I do. I've said that publicly.
Well, you indicated to me in a private conversation we had that you have family in Florida. And so I'm assuming you have relatively free movement between Guatemala and the US for you.
Yes, I do. And unfortunately, every time I go to the United States now, I have to get a COVID test. And they accept an antigen test within 72 hours before you travel. So even though I'm fully vaccinated, I went to Florida, got the Moderna vaccination back in March. And I can get into Guatemala by just showing my proof of vaccination. But I can't get into the United States by showing my proof of vaccination. Very strange. And, you know, I've consulted with doctors and they say that, yeah, even though you're vaccinated, you could still pass COVID to somebody else. But the probability of a fully vaccinated person passing COVID to somebody else is less than the probability of an unvaccinated person who takes an antigen test that's negative 72 hours before traveling. In other words, that person is more likely to pass COVID on to another person. So where's the logic in what the United States government is doing? I just don't see it.
Well, let me say this, Steve, even though I think your earbud
I got it back in.
It bit the dirt. So I hope you can hear what I'm saying, because certainly your presentation and your candid answers to the questions of our participants, absolutely appreciate it. It's our objective as an organization to make sure that we hear the facts and that we get it from people who are on the ground, who know what's going on. So as a 50-year resident of Guatemala and someone who tracks these particular issues, thank you for sharing the information. Thank you for sharing your views. We come to the end of this. Apparently, most of our West Coast participants are coming up on the lunch hour. Obviously, have made plans at their local country club. So therefore, my question queue has been exhausted, and we will conclude the webinar at this time. And Steve, I'm going to give you a chance for comment, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Jim McFarland for closing comments.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Ken. I really enjoyed my communications with you over the last few months leading up to this presentation. I've enjoyed doing it. I'm grateful for the opportunity. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking of looking into joining your organization. It seems like a great organization. And I think nonpartisanship is something that is really becoming lost in the United States. And if any of your listeners think that I was too partisan, well, I apologize to them. I did my best to give the facts and try to keep politics out of this as much as possible. And I think that's an excellent thing that your organization does. And again, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks to you and to Linda and to Jim.
Steve, I want to thank you personally for your presentation and for your, we very much appreciate your sticking to the facts, although it is clear that a number of the facts are not facts that we would like to hear. I think I heard you say that there are changes that the United States policy level there in Guatemala that could be easily changed. I won't say easily, could be changed that would help the push portion of this problem, but those are not being addressed. Did I get that correct?
Exactly correct, Jim.
Okay, so that's disconcerting. It's a fact, it's disconcerting. And I think as a citizen, we're pretty much sitting here feeling helpless about what this could be, how things can be resolved. So have you received, you're quite knowledgeable, have you received any inquiries from our current administration as to your views on this subject?
No, I don't think the current administration wants to know my views, and they probably do because I have a website, impunityobserver.com, and my views are well known. And you know, I would love for them to change policy and do what they say. They want to help Guatemala. They want to help it get rule of law. Well, I would like them to at least consider the possibility of changing policy and working together with the Guatemala administration to create rule of law here would help both countries, and I'd be willing to help them do it.
Do you have contacts, associates in the United States in government circles that might help advance your views up the chain?
Yes, I do. I know several people. I have contacts with various congressional offices, and I know people who have been involved in government. And yeah, I do have contacts like that. And they would love to see the same thing that I would love to see. Good for the United States, good for Guatemala, and good for the region in general.
Have they been successful at all in moving the needle on getting some of this done?
Not really. It's pretty difficult. Like the Trump administration, some of those people were pretty good, but what they paid attention to the pull factors. They were interested in limiting the pull factors, keeping people out, but they didn't do anything in terms of mitigating the push factors. And I think that was their greatest failure in policy in this area.
Excellent. Steve, this has been exceptional. I have to say that we always look to bring our members perspectives that they will not get anywhere else, and I can guarantee you that you satisfied that today in spades. Although some other things, like I mentioned, we probably would prefer we didn't hear in that direction, but that's the way it is. But thank you so much. And yes, we would love to have you as a member. We realize you cannot come to each of our monthly meetings, but we'd be delighted to have you as an internet member, so we can work on that with you. We do have a number of exceptional programs throughout the year. This year, about 16 of these. So we cover a variety of subjects, and this one was high on our list. So thank you very much. Thank all of you for attending.
Let me say one thing, Jim.
Yes.
Just one thing. You said a couple of times that I said some things that you would have preferred that weren't the case. Not that you don't want to hear them, but that they didn't happen. I agree 100% with that. As a matter of fact, that's the reason I began to write. That's the reason I began to appear on TV. That's the reason that I'm here with you today, because those things bother me. They upset me a lot. And I want the public to know, because I think that an informed citizenry is the way to have the best government. And so I try to do my part. And it's unfortunate that those things exist. But if they do, and you know about it, like I know about it, you got to speak up. That's my feeling about it. And again, thank you very much for having me.
You are exactly correct. People do have to speak up. And so thank you for helping to broadcast that. Ken, thank you for adroit handling of the questions as usual. And also thanks to all of you who attended. I do want to remind you that we have another program coming up next month on Canada and what is the state of US-Canadian relations. And I think this is a subject that you will find is somewhat different in reality than appears on the surface. So I hope you'll join us then. Thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you next time.